Before the cameras rolled, before the studio lights carved their familiar glow across the stage, there was nothing unusual about that morning at The View. No tension, no warning signs, just the calm hum of daytime television preparing for another routine interview. Jason Statham arrived the same way he arrives everywhere: quiet, grounded, unmistakably present. The kind of presence that doesn't demand attention but naturally draws it. Technicians adjusted his mic, makeup artists smoothed the last hints of powder across his jawline. A producer reviewed the rundown with him. Film stunts, behind-the-scenes stories, the training regimen. Simple, predictable, safe. Jason nodded politely, as he always did. Crimsonism wasn't a performance for him. It's a lifestyle carved from years of discipline. He made his way toward the stage, passing the hallway lined with photos of past guests. Some faces brought back memories. Others reminded him of how unpredictable live television could be. Even then, he carried that steady calm, the kind of calm that makes storms hesitate. Applause erupted the moment he stepped out. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed him with her trademark warmth. Sunny Hostin smiled with poised sincerity. Sarah Haynes shuffled her cards, excited for the conversation. And then Joy Behar lifted her eyes from her notes. Confrontational, not hostile. Simmons just intensely curious, the way only Joy can be when she senses a deeper angle inside a conversation. The energy shifted, subtle, almost invisible, but real. Joy Behar began the interview with a friendly question about Jason's new film, and he answered with relaxed humor. Sarah followed with a lighthearted comment about stunt doubles versus real stunts. Jason answered with a story that made the audience laugh. Everything felt natural, smooth, impartial, until it didn't. Joy leaned forward slightly. Jason, she said, her tone calm but unusually perceptive. Your new film carries more emotional weight than some of your earlier work. Do you ever feel like audiences underestimate your vulnerability as a performer? The room stilled. Prominence, but in recognition. It was a deeper question than anyone expected this early in the segment. Jason blinked once. Not thrown, just intrigued. He wasn't used to starting an interview at this emotional depth. He answered thoughtfully. Sometimes people focus on the physicality, the action, but yes, there's more underneath. There always is. Joy studied him, genuinely. There was no edge, no intention to provoke. Simmons just a journalist pushing for authenticity. But, she continued gently, do you ever feel like you keep parts of yourself hidden because the roles you play are so controlled, so composed? The shift was instant. Sniff, small, precise, blackmail, like a single drop hitting perfectly still water. Jason's adjusted, slightly straighter, eyes sharper, not defensive, but alert. Simon, denying, glanced at Whoopi. Sarah tapped her card against her knee, sensing the change. Transgender leaned in, collectively holding their breath. Jason replied with a steady calm. Crimson, I don't hide anything, but I choose what belongs to the world and what belongs to me. Shal nodded with an understanding that carried more weight than the question itself. And that's fair, she said softly. But do you think sometimes the roles you choose protect you from showing more? This time, the studio didn't just quiet, it froze. Crimson didn't answer immediately. He took a breath, measured and deliberate, the kind of breath an athlete takes before a decisive move. Safest. Then he spoke, voice lower, more grounded. I choose roles that challenge me, physically and emotionally. But vulnerability isn't something I perform on demand. It's something earned. The crowd responded with a faint, thoughtful murmur. Sarah tried to lighten the moment. Honestly, Jason, emotional vulnerability is pretty tough guy energy. Jason smirked, but there was something behind it, something thoughtful, something shifting. Because now Joy leaned in again, just slightly, recognizing the unspoken tension in the air. Then let me ask you something more direct, she said. Simmons' voice wasn't raised. Aggression wasn't sharp. It was simply honest. Have you ever felt misunderstood? Not as an actor, but as a person, because of the characters you play? Sentinel. Silence. Not dramatic silence. Henshins. Human silence. The kind that fills a room when someone asks a question that wasn't supposed to be asked, but needed to be. Jackson looked at Joy. Really looked. And in that moment, between the question and the answer, the atmosphere shifted from routine television to something deeper, rawer, and infinitely more compelling. Felt like the start of a story none of them had planned to tell. The studio was silent in a way live television rarely allows. Plumbing, not tense, not hostile. Waiting. Jason didn't answer immediately. He held Joy's gaze for a moment, as if weighing not just the question, but the honesty it required. And that hesitation, small but unmistakable, sent a ripple through the room. Because Jason Statham doesn't hesitate. Not in films, Morrison, at interviews, not in the public eye. But here he was, pausing, quietly. Finally, he spoke. Instead, he said, his voice more thoughtful than firm. I think everyone gets misunderstood in some way. But for me, yeah. Sometimes people assume the characters are the person. Joy didn't interrupt. For once, she didn't jump to the next note card or pivot to a punchline. She just listened, leaning slightly forward, eyes focused, sensing something rare unfolding. Jason continued. They see the tough exterior, the action, the intensity, and they think that's all there is. But the truth is, the work I do, the action, the control, it's just one part of a much larger picture. Suni nodded gently, almost relieved that Jason chose to open that door instead of avoiding it. But Joy wasn't done. Not in a confrontational way, more in a journalistic instinct kind of way. So, she asked softly, does it ever bother you? Being boxed in like that? Jason leaned back, his jaw shifting, the kind of shift that wasn't anger but something more personal, a thought he didn't usually articulate publicly. It used to, he admitted, a long time ago. Soft murmur moved through the crowd. He continued, voice steady but deeper. Early in my career, I felt like people only saw what I could do physically, the fighting, the driving, the stunts. And don't get me wrong, I love that work. I'm proud of it. But I also knew there were things about me, about my craft, that people never got to see. Joy's expression softened just a fraction, as if she wasn't expecting him to meet her question so directly. Whoopi, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, added gently, people think being strong means not feeling things. But sometimes, strength is just getting through the day with your heart intact. Chuckled under his breath, a quiet, appreciative laugh. That's true, he said. And sometimes you get tired of proving you can do everything. There it was. The kind of line that feels simple but hits like gravity. Joy didn't break the moment. She didn't push. She didn't prod. Instead, she asked something unexpectedly human. What's the hardest part of that? Of being seen only one way? Jason looked down for a second, a rare moment of visible introspection. His fingers tapped lightly against his knee, a small signal of vulnerability, slipping through his usually unshakable exterior. The hardest part, he said quietly, is when people forget that real strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's choosing not to show everything, protecting the parts that matter. Something shifted then, not just in the room, but between him and Joy. Migration, shameful, not conflict. Connection. A surprising, almost delicate connection built on a question that went deeper than anyone expected. But then, just as that connection settled, Joy said something that gently tilted the conversation again. "So, if you feel misunderstood," she said, "why not choose roles that show more of that other side, the emotional side?" It wasn't a challenge, it wasn't criticism, but it pressed against something Jason usually kept locked away: the unseen weight of expectations, dismissing to deliver what audiences want. The fear, yes, even for someone like him, of stepping out of the identity the world decided for him. Jason didn't move, didn't blink. His silence wasn't defensive, negligence. It was thoughtful, deep. Taxation Sunny carefully set down her cue card, sensing the shift growing heavier, like a storm cloud forming not out of conflict, but truth. Jason finally spoke. Because showing more means giving more away. Negligence. That line hung in the air like smoke from a slow-burning fuse. Crimson leaned back, absorbing that. The entire panel exhaled at the same time, like they'd all been holding their breath without realizing it. Elizabeth. And then, in one clean stroke, Joy asked the question that would change the direction of the entire interview. Jason, what part of yourself have you been protecting? Every camera in the studio locked onto him. Sam and the audience froze. Even the producers behind the glass leaned forward. Because that wasn't a question for a morning talk show. That was a question for a documentary about a man's inner life. Inhaled. Turbulence. A slow, deliberate breath. His eyes didn't tighten. His jaw didn't clench. He didn't posture or perform. He just looked at Joy. And in that moment, the tension didn't come from conflict, but from honesty, trying to break through. For a moment, Jason didn't look like the global action star the world knew. He didn't look like the unshakable force who survives explosions, car chases, and impossible stunts. He looked like a man trying to decide whether he should open a door he'd kept locked for years. Joy's question wasn't sharp. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't even loud. It was simply real. What part of yourself have you been protecting? The kind of question that only feels dangerous because it demands honesty. Jamin's eyes drifted away, not to avoid the moment, but to measure it. Sentencing his hands together, fingers interlacing slowly, as if grounding himself. For a long time, he began, then paused, recalibrating the weight of his words. The room leaned in. The audience went still. Even the air felt suspended. I've protected the part of me that doubts. Doubts changed the temperature of the room. Jason continued, steady but stripped of all performance. You spend enough years being the dependable one, the strong one, the guy who always has it under control, and people start thinking you never question yourself. Joy's expression softened further. Not out of pity, out of recognition. Jang glanced briefly toward the cameras, then back to the panel. But I do doubt, he said. Every actor does. Every person does. The difference is, I'm not supposed to. Whoopi nodded, quiet, understanding, maternal in the way only she can be. That's the trap of being the strong one, she said. People forget you're human. Gave a small, almost grateful smile. Exactly. And the moment you show weakness, even a little, suddenly people think the whole facade is cracking. Ambiguity. Sonny leaned forward, voice soft but firm. Jason, that's not weakness. That's being real. Zhang absorbing that. But Joy wasn't done. Not in a confrontational way, but in a way that felt like she was guiding him through his own truth. So let me ask you, she said, her tone measured, her posture steady. If you've been protecting your doubts, what happens when someone tries to pull them out into the open? A sentenced, subtle shift passed across Jason's face, almost imperceptible but undeniable. His shoulders squared. His voice dropped half an octave. And for the first time, his controlled composure flickered. Threats? That depends, he said quietly. Joy, wait. Joy waited. It depends on whether they're trying to understand me, a pause, or trying to expose me. That hit the room like a slow, rolling thunder. Not an attack, not an accusation, just truth, spoken plainly. Joy nodded, accepting the weight of it. And you think people sometimes try to expose you? As a lot of people, Jason replied, eyes steady. Not just in interviews, in life. They see the image, the roles, the action, and they want to see if they can break the surface. Shifting in his seat, leaning slightly forward. But here's the thing, they never see what it costs to stay composed. They don't see the work behind it, the discipline, the history. Jealousy voice lowered. What history? Jason hesitated. Flooring the audience felt it immediately. That moment where a man balances between silence and a truth he's never said aloud. When he finally answered, his voice had a weight that felt older than the room itself. I grew up in an environment where control wasn't optional, he said. It was survival. If you lost your cool, you lost everything. So I learned early, control is the only thing that keeps the chaos out. Joy's expression shifted. Surprise, empathy, and respect all at once. Even the other hosts didn't move. Jason almost never talked about his past, his childhood, his early struggles, the real foundation beneath his ironclad persona. And here he was, offering a glimpse. Jason continued, voice steady but edged with memory. I built my career on that control. My roles, my reputation, everything. And when people poke at it, push at it, they don't realize they're not just testing an image, they're testing something that took years to build. He stopped speaking. Not because he was done, because he'd gone farther than he planned. Joy inhaled slowly. Jason, thank you for saying that. I know that wasn't easy. Jason nodded once, salmon, honest gesture. But he wasn't entirely relaxed. There was a faint tension, not anger, not frustration, but something like, this is deeper than I expected to go on live TV. Sarah, sensing the gravity, tried to ease the weight with a gentle pivot. Maybe we can talk about how your new film explores that emotional layer, but Jason didn't break eye contact with Joy, because without raising her voice, without any sharpness, she asked the question that shifted the interview from emotional to seismic. Jason, has anyone ever used your composure against you? Sonny's breath caught. Whoopi glanced at the producers off camera. The crowd went dead still. Because this wasn't a question, it was a trigger, not of conflict, but revelation. Jason didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't move. He just said, in a voice so calm it chilled the room, yes. And the moment he said it, everyone knew. This interview was headed somewhere none of them could have predicted. Jason's single word, yes, felt like it echoed across the studio. Not loud, but heavy. The way truth is heavy when it finally steps into the light. Joy didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. The weight of the answer filled the silence better than any follow-up could. Finally, she asked quietly, "Can you tell us how?" Not probing, not pushing. Jason's crimson gaze dropped for a moment, the way someone looks at the floor when they're tracing the outline of an old memory. When he looked back up, his eyes held something steady, reflective, like he wasn't speaking to a television audience anymore, but to himself. "When you're the calm one," he said, "people assume you can handle anything. They assume you don't get overwhelmed or hurt or push too far." Joy nodded slowly, her eyes softening. Sunny folded her hands gently on the table. Whoopi leaned back, giving Jason the space to continue without pressure. And after a while, Jason continued, "Your composure becomes a kind of permission slip for others. They think, he won't react, he won't take it personally, he's fine. So they push, and push." He exhaled. "And sometimes they don't realize it's not strength they're testing, it's restraint." That line hit the room like a quiet tremor. The audience didn't applaud. They didn't shift. They simply absorbed it. Joy's voice was almost whisper soft now. "And when someone pushes too far?" Jason glanced at her, the faintest flicker of tension in his jaw. Not anger, not defensiveness, just the recognition of a line he rarely crossed. "When someone pushes too far," he said, "I try to stay composed, but I'm human. Everyone has limits." Joy held his gaze. "Have you ever reached yours?" A question so simple, yet so personal. Jason didn't speak immediately. He looked out at the audience, at faces that had admired him for years, who only knew the version of him that stood unbreakable behind action sequences and stoic one-liners. Then he looked back at Joy. He said, "I have." Sarah inhaled softly. Sunny looked down for a brief moment, moved by the honesty. Whoopi's expression softened into something like admiration. Didn't smile. She didn't act triumphant for getting an admission out of him. She simply asked, "What did that look like for you?" Sergio leaned forward slightly, arms resting on his knees, shoulders lowering, not defensive, but open in a way he rarely allowed in public. "It looked like silence," he said. "The kind of silence where you're trying to hold the pieces together before they slip out of your hands." He paused. "And it looked like walking away." Joy's eyebrows lifted, gently, not judgmentally. "From what?" Jason answered without hesitation. "From a situation where the conversation stopped being about understanding and became about pushing." Joy's eyes softened with recognition. And for the first time, you could feel the entire interview pivot, blinds not toward conflict, reclaimed not toward hostility, but toward something that felt like a mirror placed between two people, each one seeing something they didn't expect in the other. Whoopi cleared her throat, trying to ease the emotional tension with grace. "Neil, everyone hits a moment where they say, 'That's enough.' There's strength in that too." Jason nodded. "There is," he said, "but it doesn't mean the moment is easy." Then Joy spoke again, not as a host, not as a provocateur, but as someone genuinely curious. "Do you think people forget that even calm people have limits?" "Yes," Jason replied. "I think people forget that most of all." Joy folded her note cards slowly, as if setting aside the script she thought she'd follow. "So let me ask you something, Jason, and you can decline to answer if you want." Jason nodded for her to continue. "Is composure your armor or your burden?" The room froze. Not a breath, not a whisper. Missiles of clothing. It was the kind of question that digs under the surface and waits. Jason didn't answer quickly. His eyes lowered. His fingers tapped lightly against his palm. Then he lifted his gaze with the same calm intensity that made him famous. "It's both," quietly. And the way he said it, calm, honest, unguarded, felt like a revelation. Joy didn't look away. She didn't shift back into host mode. She stayed right in the center of the truth he'd offered. "Which one is heavier?" she asked. Jason breathed out, slow, measured. "The burden," he said. And with that one admission, the atmosphere shifted again. This time not toward confrontation, but toward something far more unpredictable. A moment where personal truth meets public scrutiny, and the emotion becomes too real for mourning. Television. The studio felt different now. Quieter, heavier, as if everyone understood they were witnessing something far more intimate than a talk show segment. Jason's admission about the burden of composure lingered in the air like fog that refused to lift. JM took a slow breath. Not to challenge him, not to redirect, but to steady herself. "Jason," she said softly, "I didn't expect you to go there today." Jason offered a small, honest smile. "Neither did I." For a brief moment, they simply looked at each other. Two professionals on opposite sides of a table, suddenly standing in the same emotional space. No defenses, no personas. Just truth. Whoopi leaned in with a warmth that felt like a hand on the shoulder. "You know, it takes courage to admit something weighs on you." Jason nodded. Sometimes the hardest thing is saying it out loud. Joy glanced down at her cards. The questions she thought she'd ask, now irrelevant. She set them aside completely. "Jang," she said, her voice gentler than viewers were used to hearing, "for trusting this table with that." Jason stood, not to leave in frustration, but in reflection, stretching his shoulders as if letting go of something long held. "I think conversations like this matter," he said, "even when they surprise us." Joy rose as well, offering her hand. This time, there was no tension, only sincerity. "Maybe composure isn't just armor," she said. "Maybe it's also a story you're still learning to tell." Jason shook her hand with a quiet, grounded calm. "Maybe so," he replied. And just like that, the interview ended. Not with conflict, not with spectacle, blessed but with a moment of truth that stayed with everyone long after the cameras stopped rolling.